The dissociative and somatic disorders are historically linked with anxiety disorders as a form of neurosis. Anxiety is expressed directly and in different forms of anxiety disorders, but as a role in dissociative and somatoform disorders is inferred. Normally speaking, there is a unity to the consciousness that gives rise to a sense of self. The perceived, we perceive ourselves as progressing through space and time. In dissociative disorder, one of the more of the aspects of daily living is disturbed. Dissociative disorder involves changes to disturbances in identity, in memory, or in consciousness that affect the daily ability to maintain an integrated sense of self. So let's begin by going and looking at what is dissociative identity disorders and somatic. In dissociative identity disorder, two or more distinct personalities, each possessing well-defined traits, memories, and they exist within the one person and repeatedly take control of the person's behavior. This was formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Now, often there's a dominant personality and subordinates, and it involves severe alterations of detachment in identity, memory, or even consciousness. Some of the defining features is a dissociation of certain aspects of personality. It involves adoption of several new identities, as many as 100. Now, these identities display unique sets of behaviors, voices, and personalities. A unique aspect of dissociative identity disorder, in terms of these multiple personalities, it involves what are known as alters. Now, these are referring to the identities that are different from the main person, or as we'll know it as the host. So these alters switch, which are these refer to different identities or different personalities in dissociative identity disorder. As I mentioned, the host is the identity that seeks the treatment and tries to keep the identity fragments together. Now, what's known as a switch is often an instantaneous transition from one personality to another. Now, Three Faces of Eve and Sybil are celebrated examples of dissociative identity disorder. However, there have been more research and questions about the frequency and the fallibility of some of the diagnoses. A dissociative identity disorder is rare, but it seems to have a greater tendency in North America. Nick Spanos of Carleton University didn't think multiple personalities was a distinct disorder. Instead, he saw it as a form of role-playing. First, individuals would see themselves as having multiple selves and would act in ways consistent with how they thought the disorder was. Then, intentionally or unintentionally, the therapist or counselor would reinforce the thought that multiple personalities were at play. Now, we're going to look at dissociative amnesia. Now, this is a type of dissociative disorder in which a person experiences memory loss, and for personal information mainly, and in the absence of identifiable organic causes. There's typically not a real good reason why the amnesia happens, not a bump on the head or something like that. It just seems that there's this memory loss of personal information. General knowledge and skills about how to navigate around the city or the town or use buses and taxis, that stuff is usually retained. Now, there are 5 types of dissociative amnesia: localized, selective, generalized, continuous, and systematized. Now, sometimes people they may say they don't remember events or other things. Now, pretending amnesia is known as malingering, or faking illnesses so as to avoid or escape work or other duties, or to obtain some benefits. Now, personalized disorders involve persistent or reoccurring episodes of depersonalization. These are of sufficient severity to cause significant distress or impairment in functioning. Now, depersonalization, these are feelings of unreality or detachment from one's own self or from one's body, as if we're a robot or functioning in an automatic pilot and observing one side from the outside. Depersonalization, these episodes of derealization, there's often a part of this, episodes of derealization, and they're characterized by a sense of one's surroundings have become strange or unreal. For example, colors may seem washed out or very brightened for a time, and may seem oddly slowed down or even sped up. Psychodynamic theorists view dissociative experiences as a form of psychological defense by which the ego defends itself against troubling memories and unacceptable impulses by blotting them out or taking them right out of consciousness entirely. Massive use of repression, that's a defense mechanism, may lead to the splitting them off from consciousness of the impulses and of memories. There's increasing documentation of a link between dissociative disorders and early childhood trauma. This lends some support to the view that dissociation may serve to protect the self from troubling memories. Now, contradictorily or alternatively, learning theorists consider the repeated not thinking about disturbing acts or thoughts in order to avoid anxiety and remove feelings of guilt and shame. So instead, they sort of learn not to think about things, and therefore the presentation of amnesia. Now, Spano again would talk about the forms of role-playing via observational learning. Having seen somebody with amnesia, they may sort of role-play it, and it may become a part of their experience. Now, psychoanalysis is the uncovering of early childhood traumas, and little is known about whether this will work very well. There are very few examples. Biological approaches focus on the use of drugs to treat the anxiety and depression, often associated with the disorder. But drugs have not been able to bring about reintegration of personalities. Medication and cognitive therapy is also shown to have some success. These combinations, as I've mentioned before, a lot of times the therapies will be combined. Now, the learning perspective, it focuses on the use of behavioral methods of reinforcing and reinforcement of the most well-adjusted personality. So psychologists will work with the most dominant personality and try to invite the others out. The goal with the learning approach is reintegration of all the different personalities into one. All right, there's the beginning when we looked at dissociative disorders. The next part 2, we'll look at somatic disorders.